All right, hello everybody. We are back. We are back. We've been off for about what, 10, 11 months now. And that is because I have gotten some education. So the first thing I want to announce is that uh, I am renaming this YouTube stream. It'll no longer be called I would no longer mention 12 steps in synonymous to recovery. Why? Because recovery is so vast. I mean, there are many avenues to recovery. And then just to mention one, for example, like the 12 steps, whether it's NA or AA or any other 12-step group or any group period, would suggest that these are the only avenues of recovery, and it's not. There are many avenues of recovery. It's spiritual, it's religious, it's 12 steps, it's whatever the individual thinks that's good for them, right? And it's not for me to say what method is the best. So that being said, we're gonna move on, and we're gonna call this particular show or stream or channel. We're gonna call it 12-step coaching. That's right. It's gonna be called 12-step coaching. And let me get my notes. That being said, moving on and jumping into this thing is, I just want to take a second out so I can like calm down and get my energy level right. So I'm gonna take a calm down and take a couple deep breaths. Yeah, get that good prana, baby. I'm gonna take one more breath. And let's jump into it. So we're going to be talking about, so why this all of a sudden name change? And I talked about that before. However, we're going to talk about this particular stream is going to be based on different views, coaching, problem solving for people in the recovery process, or who want to get into recovery, or who want to find out about recovery. So the name is going to be called Recovery Coaching from Addiction to Recovery. And the purpose is to incite what? Consciousness and enlightenment to recovery. And this podcast is going to we're going to put out some recovery techniques, some suggestions, some advice. We're going to talk about individual recovery, group recovery, what that's about. And it's for anybody, man, anybody. It's for the atheist, the agnostic, the religious, wherever you may fall in at. We don't care about sexual identity, creed, color, nationality, religion, lack of religion, none of that stuff. All right, so first question, what is addiction? What is addiction? Definition of addiction. So what I'm gonna do, bam, I'm gonna take my little smartphone here, and I'm gonna ask, what is addiction? And it says addiction. Well, it's got a lot of stuff. It says addiction is a complex condition, a brain disease that is manifested by compulsive substance. I'm gonna keep it real simple. It's obsessive and compulsive behavior, thinking and behavior. That's all I'm gonna say, man. And it is manifested not only through drugs and alcohol, sex, gambling, food. Yeah, you might think you're a food connoisseur, but you 5'5" and you weigh 200 pounds. I need to tell you something, right? That should suggest something to you. It could also be money making, whether you addicted, where you got businesses or selling dope, selling drugs, you know. There's an addiction that comes with that. Over people, control issues. Then so moving on. I want to throw something on the table called trauma. What is trauma? And what does trauma has to do with addiction? Well, since the components of addiction is obsessive and compulsive behavior, trauma in relation to addiction is it. Well, okay, so what is trauma? So let's go back to here to the brain, my phone. What is trauma?
According to American Psychological Association, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical.
Oh man, did y'all hear that? Shock and denial are typical. And denial is one of the main components of addiction. So I'm going to read that again right quick. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. And notice it includes natural disaster. What is a natural disaster? Well, it could be flooding. It could be a hurricane. It could be an earthquake and so forth. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Shock and denial, like, damn, like shock is like, damn, I can't believe this happened to me. And then denial is like, it didn't happen, or it wasn't that bad, or I can handle this, right? So I shouldn't have put my phone down. And then it says, shock and denial typical. Longer term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headache or nausea. So what happens is traumatic events can affect a person's relationship, not only with other people, but with self. Because when I'm in denial, what is that called? I'm basically kind of like hurting myself, right? So that being said, we're going to look at some different forms of trauma and what they are. And I got another notebook. Bam. I'm going to open up that notebook too. My definitions of trauma. Well, they ain't mine. I had to research some of this stuff. And the reason why I'm laying this foundation off, because this is what this stream is going to be I'll be referring back to this information for the duration. And how long will the stream last? Until the wheels fall off. Until one of us stop breathing. Me or somebody else. Bam. All right. So, trauma, the cause of trauma, I just gave in that definition. So the three types of trauma, and there's actually four. The first one is called acute trauma. This level of trauma occurs when an individual experiences a single stressful or dangerous event. One event, single, and it was stressful or dangerous. Person could have got robbed, or it could have been a natural event, like we talked about earlier. Person could got raped or molested. Now, in this example of trauma, which is acute trauma. In certain cases, a person can take some counseling and get over it. You know, they just had one event in their life, and then what happened is they, went and got some help, seen a psychiatrist, or got into some type of group, got some group counseling, and then they got over the event. Next one is called chronic trauma. Chronic trauma occurs when repeated and prolonged to a when a person is exposed to a prolonged and repeated event. It was stressful and dangerous. But notice it's prolonged. It happened more than once. Could be domestic violence from the same person, or repeated rape, or repeated molestation, or an accident. They had an accident over here and then turned around and went across town and had another accident. Then on their way home, they had another accident. They was having a bad day. That's what you call a bad day. And complex trauma results from multiple traumatic events. Multiple. So they went over here, they had an accident, turned around, was coming home on the bus and got robbed. Then, after they got robbed, when they came in the house, they got beat up because they done wrecked the car. Then they left the house, was going over to their friend's house, and turned around and got molested or raped. So that's called complex trauma. And then the last two instances of trauma, chronic trauma and complex trauma, counseling is needed. But what happens in all three cases of trauma, the individual would take on a different personality, or a personality is invented to support denial of the events that happen. And what happens after that is a person start living in pain, type of pain, mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional pain. And then they start doing things to relieve the pain. In some areas, it's called self-medication. They'll turn to food. They'll turn to sex. They'll turn to drugs and alcohol. They'll turn to pills. They'll turn to shopping. They'll turn to gambling. They'll turn to anything that will make them feel better or forget or support that denial about what happened to and with them. Sure. And then at the same time, I want to bring up another. Okay, I want to go to the next one. PTSD. And there's another type of it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. And this occurs in individuals' youth. They might have been put in a group home, they might have abandonment issues, or some of the other stuff that I've mentioned already. And then as they grow up, this post-traumatic stress disorder starts surfacing in their life, and then they start resorting to the drug thing. They start resorting to the sex thing, to the gambling thing. I mean, it's all types of stuff that can come from or emanate from stress. So the next part, and moving on with this, another type of personality is developed. It's called the shadow self. And this term was popular by a psychiatrist called Carl Jung. This is his theory. And the shadow self happens when, for example, when a person gets molested, and a lot of us have experience with that. So when a person gets molested or one of these traumatic events happen, what happens is a person a personality is developed. It's developed, or there's an offshoot of this personality of the individual that's developed. That the stress has happened to, and it's called a shadow. And the shadow comes up when a person might feel threatened, or they might remember or see something or smell something or taste something that reminds them of this traumatic event. And then this other person steps forward to what? To, in some cases, to defend or help this person through what they perceive is what is happening to them again. This is called your shadow self. But I'm gonna say this too. Another part of the shadow self is this. So let's say a person has an alias, and we hear it all the time in the street or when we listen to music, whether it's rap or country or whatever. People tend to take on a name, you know, and their name might be pretty cute or whatever the name they can come up with. Well, that's another part of a shadow self. They develop a whole personality to, and we see it a lot in the entertainment field. These people will bring up different types of name to you know, so this personality would come out and represent themselves. This is also happens in the shadow self. And how's this connected to addiction? Well, remember that denial I was talking about? All this is a part of that denial, because at the end of the day, usually your name is what's on your birth certificate, and then a lot of times people have a hard time dealing with that. So moving on, we talked about the shadow self. We talked about trauma. We talked about how trauma and addiction is related. And the reason why I'm going over this stuff is because in the bigger picture, when we get down and we start talking about recovery techniques and what people are recovering from, it's going to be, or I ain't gonna say it's going to be, it is. It's directly related to exactly what I'm talking about. RAT now, right now. And so moving on, what happens is through the backing up through the traumatic events, and these personalities are developed. And let's say the individual goes on to what is called the symptoms: the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, the gambling, the shopping, the eating, the working, the money making, or whatever it is. These alternate personalities that have been developed is what the individual relies on. Actually, they take over, and we're going to call them entities. Now, there's another situation I want to bring up. So let's say a person, and I'm just going to come straight out with it. I'm going to talk about resentment, anger, and fear. Resentment, anger, and fear are what in some places they're called the triangle of what? Self-acceptance. Excuse me, yeah. The triangle of self-obsessions. And people that have obsessive and compulsive behavior or are prone to addiction, some of their major tools that they use is resentment, anger, and fear. And inside the resentment, What it is that they're angry at their past. They're angry at their past. And let's say anything from 90 days till prior to all the way back to whatever their childhood is. I mean, to their childhood based on what their age is. Then you have anger. Anger when people are just angry in the moment. And they're angry at whatever. And fear is fear of the future. And what happens is these different types of personalities, what I just talked about, these are the personalities that brings on these thoughts and experiences. Because addiction affects the individual mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Now, when I talk about spiritually, I don't mean religious. I mean energetically, as far as their energy is concerned, as far as what we see when we look at a person, what we see when we look at an individual, and we say, oh, you know, this person is hyper, or they're very mono. So moving on, and I'm about to wrap this up. I'm about to wrap this segment up. So now we've covered the foundation of how addiction begins and what it really is. The symptoms of addiction is the drugs, is the alcohol, is the food, is the gambling, is the money making, is the sense of security through power and domination of others. And the entities are the entities that tend to take over a person is resentment, anger, and fear, but also the components of resentment, anger, and fear. And why I say resentment, anger, and fear is because resentment, anger, and fear is they have subcomponents. Each of them that an individual addict tends to let's say they tend to use. When we talk about manipulation, deceitful, lying, when we talk about control issues, usually these are based on the resentment, the anger, and the fear, and the trauma is directly related to it. And the pain that the individual feels, if not treated in some type of form of fashion, whether it's psychologist, psychiatry, or some type of recovery program, then the individual and also groups, and we're going to talk about groups later on. What happens is, at some point in this recovery process, individuals, man, they use and they wreak havoc on themselves and and the lives of others. So what happens is, at some point, the individual either they die, or they go to jail, or they become a derelict, or they get involved in some type of an institution, or they recover. They seek some type of recovery, whether it's a 12-step recovery, whether it's church recovery, whether it's and if you agnostic or atheist, you might come up with a method of recovery that's comfortable with you. Yeah, that's comfortable with you. So I want to say this, right? So if you know somebody, or even yourself, because I'm gonna tell y'all something. A lot of times people that are addicts, they don't even know. They too busy looking at somebody else who has an obvious problem. They don't think they're addicted. I know people like that personally. And you know what? No matter what you say, no matter what you do, you can pray over them. You can confront them with their issues. And believe me, they will have something that makes sense to them that they don't think they got a problem. And you like, damn. Because denial is a complex entity within itself. A person will be in denial about being in denial, about being in denial about what's going on with them. Yeah. So anyway, wrapping this situation up, I'm going to stop right here. And we're going to put out another segment. But this is the first. Like I said, I changed the name. I got rid of the 12-step recovery situation. And I am calling this recovery coaching. My thing is, I am a recovery coach, certified. Also, I've been in recovery for over 30 years. And I'm just inspired to do this, man. You know, and I hope y'all support me. Press the like button down there if you like it. You know, tune back in. I also got a podcast coming up with the same name, I believe it is, yeah. And I'll be doing a segment on that podcast later on today, 12/11/2021. Yeah. I mean, you know, what else do I have to do, man, except for reach out? And plus, write in the comments anything you want to talk about and anything you want to bring up. I don't care what it is. It could be about God. It could be about anything concerned, but it has to be concerning recovery. But I'm going to tell y'all something. Everything concerns recovery because you know why? Over 80% of the population or the people that I ran across suffer from addiction in some form. And I said 80% of the people that I come across. And that's because I have an inventory 80% of the people in the world, of the population of the earth or the United States. But because of Zoom, I'm beginning to come across more people. You know, I myself is in the recovery process. I am in recovery. I'm not going to tell y'all what. But I've been on a lot of platforms. So anyway, also, I'm be coming up with different material for other people. So the ice is broken. This is going to be the first one for my podcast. I'm going to use this on my podcast, but after the podcast, I'm going to be using different materials. I'm just going to spice it up, man, but I need y'all help. I need y'all support. I need people's comments. You know, my email is going to be listed in the comments. So let's recover together. I mean, if you're having problems with relapse, and we're going to talk about relapse, what a relapse is and what a relapse ain't. Because some people had a relapse and they still using and they calling it a relapse. You can only relapse once, baby. Anything after that, I'm saying in a space period, you only relapse one, and then after that, it's just using. You still getting high. You know. Anybody that's watching this and you know somebody, you got some concerns about them, you know, hit me up. Ask that question. Because look, when I help y'all, I help me. And I need some help. I need plenty of help. And so with this, we're going to wrap it up right here. And I'm going to say this, right? Be present in your own recovery. Be present in your own life. And when I say present, it's the here and now. Because Recovery happens in the here and now. With that, I want to say thanks